The events of 9/11 produced stories of tragedy and despair. Yet out of the wreckage also came stories of triumph, compassion, and hope. The fireman you're about to meet saw firsthand the destruction and loss of life at Ground Zero. At that time, he was also a medical student, and the 9/11 experience continues to shape his career today, 10 years after the towers came down.
Every minute I can remember.
At the moment the first plane hit the World Trade Center on that morning of September 11, 2001, Richard Oakler and his fellow firefighters took action.
I was actually working in the Bronx that day. The talk was going on, everybody's getting called down.
Down to what they call the box, Ground Zero.
It was a giant response, all volunteer companies from all over the place.
At first, Richard's company stayed north of Ground Zero to help feed supplies to rescue workers. The morning of the second day, they headed for the wreckage that was once the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center.
You can see the pictures, but the thing that always, still to this day, strikes me was the heat. It was this overwhelming heat that it was like standing in front of a furnace. And then I think it was really the silence. It was just quiet. I mean, which is really, it was really ominous.
This loud and bustling city had morphed into something else.
The big concern, obviously, was life and seeing if there's anyone there.
Something that was hard to fathom.
You know, how could anybody really be alive in there? But it's just, you know, that's the first thing. Everybody's like, well, we got to get this pile out of here and see, you know, and get everybody out from underneath there, because we just assumed, you know, that there'd be a whole group of folks trapped under there. But, you know, unfortunately that never happened.
Their task turned from saving lives to one of recovery. Richard was one of thousands who lost people in that attack.
And some of those folks were in, you know, and high up in the tower. So friends and friends of friends that, you know fairly well were the ones that were there. I've never been back.
Why?
I don't know. Never been back. I think just emotionally, I don't know, it would be difficult to go back.
Richard has not gone back to that place, but every day he faces the symptoms the inferno may have caused. Because
I never had asthma before, and then since I do notice I wheeze now and then.
Richard is a pulmonologist, a lung doctor at Mayo Clinic. He researches acute lung injury that can happen when a patient in an intensive care unit is on a ventilator. In addition to that, Richard is interested in the chronic lung issues many who were first on the scene at 9/11 suffer.
Just thinking of all of the different compounds, chemicals, hydrocarbons that came down in that soot and dust, it's not surprising that there's so many different types of pulmonary problems that we're finding.
Diseases such as chronic cough, asthma, sarcoidosis, and maybe lung cancer.
Between you know, the first few hours after the towers came down, and then probably about 24, 36 hours afterwards is where most people were affected.
People such as his close friend who breathed in the dust as those buildings collapsed.
He's unfortunately one of the folks who is pretty sick right now.
A study in the journal Lancet suggests firefighters at 9/11 are at an increased risk of developing cancer than firefighters who were not there. Researchers, including Richard, say even though it's a decade later, it's still too early to tell exactly what the long-term health effects will be.
What we'd like to do is be able to treat these folks ahead of time, know who's going to get sick, who's not.
It's not easy to go back to that day in 2001.
You know, obviously we all lost some people we know and good friends, and you know, in some ways it's difficult, I guess, to talk about.
But for Richard, the tough memories are eased a bit when he remembers the moments of compassion and hope that triumphed even in the midst of the tragedy that happened in New York City on 9/11.
You know, all these strangers were just putting all of these other strangers first.
Other than memories, Richard doesn't have many tokens from Ground Zero, except for this hat, discolored from the dust of the wreckage.
It's just special to me because I wore it pretty much the whole time. A little bit of something to remember the guys by, as well as the, you know, everything that happened that day, so we don't forget all those people that were lost.
Dr. Oakler says there's now a registry of close to 14,000 people who were at 9/11. From this data, doctors hope to learn more about the health effects of that event. For Medical Edge, I'm Vivian Williams.